serves on the Homeland Security Committee. Senator, thanks so much for joining us. Were you at all surprised by your Republican colleagues' decision to change their positions on this war with Iran, the Iran war powers issue, as it's called? What's your takeaway?
Yeah, look, Wolf, I don't think that's the right approach. I think it's very clear that there is bipartisan opposition to the Iran war. The fact that this is still just a ceasefire, that we don't have full confirmation of how this is going to end. I mean, what is clear, and the American people see this, is that this war has been a strategic failure. That the American people have spent upwards of $60 to $70 billion more on fuel since the war. It has cost us tens of billions of dollars more when it comes to the military problems that we've had. So, this is something that across the board we recognize. Are we any safer now than before? And the answer is no. Are we poorer now than we were before? Yes, that is the answer. And so that is what we are trying to stand up against, seeing how Trump has led our country recklessly down this path. Meanwhile, he's gutting the support that we should be giving to the American people when it comes to housing and other things that he clearly is not interested in.
What do you say to Trump's argument that he's effectively eliminating the possibility of Iran, a state sponsor of terror, eventually getting nuclear weapons?
I mean, it's absurd what he's saying. I mean, he can live in his magical fantasy if he liked, but that's just not what bears out. I'm someone who worked at the State Department, the Pentagon, on the Middle East. We know full well that Iran has the ability to be able to rebuild their ballistic missiles. We know that they have other capabilities that this war has not closed the door off to. In fact, this has just made things worse with the Strait of Hormuz, which wasn't a problem before. If you look at these Iranian leaders, if they're thinking about what's going to actually prevent America from attacking them in the future, they could very well answer that by saying they need to have a nuclear weapon now. We saw that in North Korea before and elsewhere. So this is something that is not leaving us any safer than before.
You also serve on the Housing, the Banking and Urban Affairs Committees, which worked extensively on the bipartisan housing package that passed the House and Senate. President Trump is now refusing to sign that legislation into law until Congress first passes his voter ID and elections overhaul legislation known as the Save America Act. Do you have any insight at all, Senator, into what the path forward is from the Senate leadership?
Yeah, first of all, this is an absolute chaotic mistake here. I mean, I have an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, 2 little boys. I know what temper tantrums are like. But what my boys would never do is do something that would harm other people. And that's what Trump's doing. He's throwing a temper tantrum, but it's going to be at the expense of the American people who can get so much out of this bill in terms of support for their housing. Look, I'm from New Jersey. We are used to Trump screwing us over. He screwed over Atlantic City. He screwed over, so many people in our state. And I will just say to him, if he really wants to see what people need right now, when next time he comes to New Jersey, he shouldn't go to his golf course in Bedminster. He should go to Newark, New Jersey, talk to the people there who need affordable housing. Maybe go back to Atlantic City, the city he screwed over, and talk to the people who are living there in the aftermath of his disastrous Taj Mahal. This is what we need to be focused on, is delivering for the American people. If he seeks to block this or veto this legislation, Congress will stand against him, and he will be publicly humiliated before the country.
I want to play for you, Senator, what some of your Republican colleagues told my colleague Manu Raju about this after President Trump canceled that signing ceremony for that housing bill. Listen to this.
Is he hurting your chances of keeping the majority?
I'm just going to say I don't think it helps. People want us to be able to deliver on priorities, absolutely, and they want to focus on things that they're talking about back home.
Wouldn't it be helpful if you guys were rallying around a big housing bill, talking about affordability in this election season?
It's a real, and we are. I mean, it may not be a big thing to him, but we're talking about it. We're grateful for it. But what'll be more?
Would it be helpful if he were?
Yeah, it would.
We're also learning, Senator, that the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, is expected to send his chamber home a day early amid GOP mutiny over the Save America Act. As a Democrat hoping to take control of Congress in the midterm elections coming up in November, what do you say to that?
Well, first of all, when I hear from my constituents back home, and frankly, Americans around the country, housing costs is at the top of the list of concerns. Affordability and high cost of living writ large, but housing is right at the top of that list. So the fact that we actually had Congress work together to be able to address that need. I mean, look, that is something that President Trump could have tried to take credit for and actually say, look, I'm focusing on affordability. Instead, he decides to just completely blow that up and show that he doesn't care at all. And he said it just a couple weeks ago that he doesn't think about what the American people's finances are like, and he's showing it now in action. He's putting his own obsessions over, over his lies about election fraud ahead of the #1 issue for the American people. So, I mean, I think he is making himself more and more irrelevant in politics in terms of what's on the people's minds. He's going to make it much harder for his party in November. And I think it shows that the Democrats are the ones that are focused on delivering for people rather than starting rogue wars that are just raising our costs, meanwhile gutting and blocking legislation that would help millions of Americans.
And as you know, Senator, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled this morning on 2 major immigration cases allowing President Trump to end what's called temporary deportation protections for Haitians and Syrians and permitting him to restart his controversial asylum policy. Like me, you're a son of immigrants. What's your reaction?
Yeah, look, I talked with a lot of people in the Haitian community in New Jersey. We have one of the largest Haitian communities in the entire country, and they've shared just the heartbreaking stories, how terrified they are of being sent back to Haiti, where there is no government control over the country, run by largely gangs, and real worries about their safety. I mean, so much so that the Trump administration tried to ban people from visiting the United States from Haiti. Meanwhile, they're saying, oh, they can send back these people who have been living here within our communities, growing families here, working in businesses here. Again, this is something that it should be, as we're thinking through, I live in a state that's right there in the shadow of the Statue of Liberty, where the Haitian community is living. And that is something that I think is so out of line. And again, this is an administration that's putting tens of billions of dollars towards ICE, towards CBPs, towards this enforcement on the immigration side. Meanwhile, it's standing in the way of legislation that would help millions of Americans when it comes to housing. I hope the American people see the choices that this president makes, because I believe that they don't stand with what the president is doing.
Before you go, Senator, I quickly want to ask you about the recent elections in your neighboring state. We're talking about New York, where multiple incumbent Democrats lost their primaries to progressive challengers endorsed by the New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani. In your view, is Mamdani's vision of the future of the Democratic Party? Is he the future?
What I'll say is that I think that right now the people of America see what I see, which is that we have a broken status quo in politics. There is, of course, a hunger for a new generation of leadership to step up. We have a great candidate in New Jersey, Rebecca Bennett, standing up against Republican Tom Kean Jr. I think that's an example of a new generation of leadership, someone who is a Navy helicopter pilot, serving in different ways. There are many ways that one can be a new generation of leadership, but what will unite us is saying that our politics is fundamentally broken. And so wherever you are on that political spectrum, I think that message is something that is resonant right now, whether from New York or elsewhere around the country, and that's what's going to be the future of the Democratic Party.
What message do you believe, Senator, that Democratic voters are trying to send from these elections that we just saw in New York this week? Are you confident that your party's current leadership is receptive to that message ahead of the midterm elections?
Well, what's receptive is, again, what these candidates are putting out there. I ran in the 2018 midterm elections when Trump was president and the Republicans control both branches of both chambers of Congress. What we want are candidates who are authentic, not candidates that are reading off of talking points given to them by pollsters or others, but people who have genuine passion for changing things, a story of their own commitment to this country. That's what's going to be resonant. That's what's going to change. And I believe my 2018 class, we helped change our politics. We helped move forward on legislation like banning members of Congress from trading stocks. That's something that leadership told us not to do, but we wanted to push forward otherwise because we know that the American people stand with an anti-corruption agenda, and we're seeing this class of candidates pushing things forward, and I think that's good for our nation.
Democratic Senator Andy Kim of New Jersey, thanks very much for joining us.